There are 5 seconds left. Tie game. You can practically hear the squeak of sneakers on the hardwood, even though the only thing actually squeaking is my chair as I lean in over the tabletop. Okay, this is it. One possession, one shot. This is why we play these games. I look down at the table, check out the players on the floor, and I immediately feel that little pang of dread. Because the guy I want taking this shot, the guy who takes this shot in real life, isn't out there. Not because he fouled out, not because he got hurt, not because the defense took him away. Nope. He's on the bench because earlier in the game, I did the most tabletop thing imaginable. I checked the card, I saw his minutes per game, I did the math, and I said, all right, he's hit his average. So now, with 5 seconds left in a tie game, my superstar is sitting there like he's clocking out at the factory whistle. And on the court, I've got my backup shooting guard, a role player who averages 7 points, and a power forward who's mostly out there to rebound and set screens. And I'm staring at this final possession thinking, what did I just simulate? Because in a real gym, in a real season, in a real moment like this, nobody is walking over to the coach and saying, hey, we can't put him back in. He's already played his average minutes. That's not coaching. That's accounting. And that's right there is the trap. Welcome to the Tabletop Sportcast. Welcome back to the Tabletop Sportcast, the podcast where we talk tabletop sports gaming through the lens of storytelling, game mechanics, and smart project planning. I'm James Cass, and today we're digging into something that sounds simple on paper, but gets messy the second the game gets tense. Managing playing time in tabletop basketball. Because if you've ever coached a full game on the tabletop, you've probably felt this tug of war. On one hand, you want your results to look like the season. On the other hand, you want to coach the game that's happening right now. And the easiest trap to fall into, the one that feels the most responsible, excuse the air quotes, is managing strictly to average minutes. But as we teased in the cold open, average minutes can turn you into an accountant at the worst possible time. And even in real life, that's not how minutes work. So today, I'm going to structure this in 3 parts. First, we're going to call out the most common pitfalls gamers fall into when managing minutes, especially the average minutes trap and why it quietly breaks realism. Second, I'll give you a few anchors that keep your coaching decisions grounded. Things like minute ranges instead of exact targets, foul trouble as a natural minutes engine, and one of my favorites, how are you planning to win this game? And third, I'll give you a simple framework you can use in pretty much any tabletop basketball system, including bank shot basketball, which is what I've been playing lately. Especially if you're running solo and managing both teams. Because solo play adds a unique challenge. You're not just coaching, you're simulating. And if you're not careful, you end up coaching both teams the same way, which makes the game feel flat. So we're going to fix that too. Before we get into that, let's go around the table. All right, last week, as we kick off around the table, we sat down with Dave Jackson and talked box seat baseball, and that was episode 242. Really enjoyed the conversation, really enjoyed hearing a lot about box seat baseball, and I'm looking forward to getting that game on my table in the very near future as well. So that is definitely one that is on my short list, probably next up in terms of what I'm going to plan to order. It's also been a while. We had a couple of interviews back to back. We sat down with Al Wilson, sat down with Dave Jackson, and now I feel like it's a good time to get caught up on some of the things that have been happening on my tabletop also. We'll do like a more thorough recap when we get to the spring show, which will be coming up at the beginning of April. But from my tabletop, the things that I've been playing most recently have been a lot of the bank shot basketball, which is really what's driving the conversation that we're going to have today. I've also jumped into a couple of different co-ops that have really been driving a lot of the action on my table. We sat down with Andy Sexton a couple weeks ago, and our 1981-82 NHL project is in the playoffs now. So I had a chance to sit down and play a couple of games for the first round of the playoffs. Saw the Islanders knock off the Philadelphia Flyers in one of my games. Also got the Rangers a win that helped them move forward in their playoff chances. They advanced to the next round. The project is now in the round 2 series. So I haven't had a chance to play one of those games yet, but I am planning to do that soon. I should be coming up on the draft list in a sense. We just try to keep going around. Kind of like a round robin, right? Of like who's going to get the next shot at a playoff game. I played my first 2 games with Hockey Blast, but planning on shifting over to 49 Quick Decks Hockey for whatever game I get next. So that'll be where I end up playing next with this little project. Obviously, also taking part in the co-op for the ABA, the 75-76 ABA. That's where all my bank shot basketball has been taking place. And then joined up with Paul Salzgeber. He's been really working on trying to finish out the 1994 Major League Baseball season. So I decided to push a couple of my planned History Maker baseball projects out a little bit and jump in for a couple of months and help him with this 1994 completion project. So I've been able to play a couple of full games as well as a couple of games with History Maker Baseball Express. One of the things we're trying to do from a stat standpoint is just track like the great home run race that was going on. We are also trying to track Tony Gwynn to see if he can get to 400. I think he's at like 386 or something like that right now. So got a long shot, but you never know. He might get hot. So for the Gwynn games, we're trying to make sure that those get played full play. But History Maker Baseball Express, as well as a couple other games, allow us to play most of the other games in different formats. So we're kind of playing around with different things. I think that Paul has used even Payoff Pitch. He's talked about using some Status Pro. I might mix in a couple of games as well. But right now I'm just trying to focus in a little bit on History Maker Baseball as we try to see how that season will finish out. My highlight of the week probably comes from NASCAR, believe it or not. Another project I've got is the 1992 NASCAR season. Ran my second race, and it was Bill Elliott who got the win. He grabbed the lead on turn 49, 50 turns in the race. And this is one that I think took place at the North Carolina Speedway. But it was the GM Goodwrench 500. And Elliott grabbed the lead on turn 49 and was able to hold off any challenges in that final turn and hold on for the win. So Bill Elliott gets win number 1 on the season in race number 2. And we are off and running. This will probably be a project that takes me a good 2 years to get through. It's about 29 races for the season. I'm just trying to do like maybe a race a month right now just to get rolling on the project. And then next year, it'll probably be more of a concentrated effort at some point to decide like where I'm going to go with that project. As we continue with Around the Table, I think there's a few game companies, including like for Season Ticket Baseball. And I also think that for 49 Quick Decks Football, Season Ticket Football. I don't know if I said football or baseball, but Season Ticket Football, 49 Quick Decks Football, both released the 2025 season. So if you're looking for that, you can get it. Fast Drive Football has released the 2025 season. And I think at this point now, Al has also finished doing all of his enhanced seasons. So as he discussed in our interview recently, once he finishes all those enhanced seasons that he was working on, it probably means he's starting to move towards the college football game. And I think he'll be working on potentially releasing a fact deck for the college football game. So he's working on a couple of updates for college football, and we'll be starting to, maybe also have a fact deck version of that game coming soon, based on what he discussed in his interview with us. There's also some other cool things coming out. There's been a little bit more press around the new matchup basketball game, and we should see that sometime at the end of next month. So looking forward to that. There's been more news regarding Stone Mountain Press, Gary Brown working on his new baseball game. So that should be something we see in the near future as well. And I also think that Powder Blue Sports, John Turnbull, has been working on a baseball game that he may be releasing sometime in the near future. And as we've heard on some of the play, and you've maybe have tuned into the Play Nation, we've got a couple of new things coming from Play as well, including the boxed version of Play at the Races, the new horse racing game, which we should see by the end of April, the new boxed version of that game too. So that's some of what's going on around the table. There's some really cool projects going on around as well. So check out everything on your Facebook pages. Check out what's happening around the Delphi forums. Check out a lot of those different projects that are out there that people are running, and, give them some support, and read up on some of the different things that they're working on too. All right, why don't we now shift into today's main topic. All right, as we get into today's main topic, I want to start by naming really the big problem, because it's the one that most of us fall into without even realizing it. We manage playing time like we're trying to hit that season average. And I get why we do it. The card tells you the minutes per game. So it feels like a target. It feels like responsibility. It feels like realism, but it's not really how basketball works. Average minutes are a season statistic. Coaching decisions are a game statistic. And the reason average minutes break down is simple. Real minutes played live in ranges. And those ranges are driven by context. Are you in foul trouble? What are the matchups you're facing? How's the game kind of unfolding as the script unplays? And what was the game plan going into the game? So I'm going to walk through this the same way I like to teach anything in tabletop gaming. Let's look at the pitfalls. Then let's bring some anchors into how we want to build our strategy, and then actually deliver a framework that you can actually use. Part 1 is pitfalls. Pitfall number 1 is the one we've been talking about, the average minutes trap. Because when you coach to a fixed number, you create unnatural moments. You sit the wrong guy at the wrong time. You force substitutions when the game is begging you not to. And here's the proof I love using. Take Michael Jordan. Take his 1987-88 season. And if you look at that season, you'll see he had just a monster year. He averaged just over 40 minutes a game. 40.4 if you want to get real specific. But the truth is, even in that season, he has a wide band. If you take his game logs and you break them down, you're going to see that of his 82 games played, he had 8 games with over 45 minutes played. He also had 7 games with 35 or fewer minutes played. And believe it or not, those 35 or fewer minute games, he wasn't in foul trouble. So this was more of a strategic plan to get him fewer minutes on a particular day. And maybe the team was up big, or maybe they were down big, right? Like, there's lots of things that may have happened in the game's script that also provided opportunities for him to get some breathers and get a little bit more rest. But really, if you think about it, 8 and 7, that's 15 games, nearly 1 out of every 5 that lived outside that kind of average zone of 36 to 44 minutes. So if your tabletop coaching never produces Jordan at 47 minutes a night or Jordan at 34 minutes a night, then you're really not simulating basketball. You're simulating a spreadsheet. The average of 40 minutes or 40.4, that's what you get after he plays 82 games. It's not what you get or what you even should be aiming for on that random Tuesday night. Pitfall number 2, symmetry coaching in solo play. And this is the one that kind of sneaks up on you when you're managing both teams. Because when you control both sides, you start making both teams reasonable. You sub the same way. You protect both stars the same way. You manage fouls the same way. You chase averages the same way. And that makes the game start to feel flat. Because real basketball isn't two identical coaches playing perfect chess. It's two different coaching identities colliding. Pitfall number 3, lineups with no offense. And this is a big one for tabletop basketball. And it's where the minutes trap and the solo trap kind of team up. You end up with a lineup that has no first line scorer, no second line scorer, and sometimes not even a real initiator. And sure, in real life, you'll sometimes see a coach survive a short stretch like that. But it's usually intentional, time-boxed, and tied to something. Foul trouble, end of quarter defense, buying rest in a blowout, or riding a matchup. What we do on the tabletop is usually worse. We accidentally create those lineups because we've been chasing minutes. So we're going to look at those kind of 3 pitfalls and think about what that does to us as we're trying to play out a tabletop game. And you might be saying, all right, you might even be already thinking, I think I know some ways I can fix this. And you're right. But before we get to that, let's kind of look at part 2 of our framework here, which is building some anchors, right? Let's start fixing. But let's start with these anchors, these guardrails that will keep you coaching the game instead of doing the math. And here's anchor number 1. Your minutes should be written in ranges, not targets. When you see minutes per game on a card, treat it like a band, not a requirement. So instead of he averages 32, so I must hit 32, you think, okay, so this is a 28 to 36 minute guy. And tonight's game script decides where he lands. And here's an easy kind of 3-band model you can steal. Dip game, lower end of the range. Base game, normal, expected minutes. Spike game, higher end. Tight game, overtime, must have kind of closing minutes kind of a game. And here's the key. And you decide the band you're using that particular game. Don't let it leave it up to the spreadsheet, right? You make the decision. And it's probably even a way that you can start to look at a player, especially those star players, and start to figure out how often can I go to that spike game? How often can I go to that dip game? Or how often should I be mostly playing in that kind of base range there? That's how you're going to want to start thinking about that. Anchor number 2, though, will be what happens during the game that kind of forces you into making some decisions about minutes played, and that is that foul trouble is kind of a natural minutes engine. Now, this is one of the best tools in tabletop basketball because it creates that realistic variance with no extra bookkeeping. In real basketball, fouls aren't just a stat. They're really a coaching force. They change the way the player's aggression is going to be throughout the game. They change the way the coach has to think about how he's substituting. They change your rotations. They change the entire pacing of the minutes played. So instead of forcing average minutes, let the foul trouble start to create those natural dips and spikes that you're going to experience throughout the game. And if one of your star players gets 2 early fouls, well, that's a dip game starting to form. If your backup picks up 3 quick ones, suddenly your starter might have to move into a spike territory. I mean, that's not a problem. That's realism. And that brings us to anchor number 3. And that's that as a coach of a basketball team, always have a scorer on the floor. This is kind of where you start to get some advantages with games like bank shot basketball, because the player cards kind of show you what you need, right? You get to see the minutes per game. You get to see the points per game. You get to see assist ratings. You get to see rebound ratings. I mean, everything's on the player card, but you don't have to go through and do all the math to figure out, okay, who's the playmakers going to be? Like, who are my shot makers? You can kind of get it from those 4 ratings, and you're going to want to focus when you think about the scorers, like, who are the top guys in terms of points per game? Figure out ahead of time. You're going to look at a roster and you're going to figure out, like, I've got myself a star. Every roster has that one star player. Behind them, they've got support players. And one of those support players is probably the secondary scorer. Who's that number 2 guy? And you probably, unless it's like a script situation where maybe the game is a blowout somehow, you should always have at least one of those 2 guys on the floor. You don't want to be subbing them out at the same time. So use those 4 ratings of minutes per game, points per game, assist ratings, rebound ratings, because that's basically a coaching cheat sheet. You know, your pro coaches, they stagger their scorers. They rarely empty the floor of creators unless the game forces it. So your tabletop anchor can be simple. Unless you run into foul trouble, or unless the game turns into a blowout, never go without a first line or second line scorer on the floor. But remember, the scorer isn't just the guy who scores the points, right? Think also about those creators. Who can help create a shot? Who can help initiate the offense? Who helps the team keep possession alive by grabbing the ball, grabbing the rebounds off the glass? That's your scoring support structure. So really think about how you're utilizing your playmakers as you think about like your rotations for the game. And now we get to anchor number 4, and it's really an important question. How do you plan on winning this game? Because this is the anchor that really ties all of this together. Because once you answer that question, the minutes now become a tool at your disposal. If your plan is to win with pace and spacing, then your rotation choices should reflect that. If your plan is to win with rebounding and second chances, then your lineup should reflect that. And if your plan is to win by riding the other team's star shot creator, or maybe riding your own shot creator, then you should stagger him so that the offense really never goes without those primary scorers. Come up with your game plan. Come up with the way that you want to think about winning the game. And that's where you start to actually think like a coach. You start to consider, what is your opponent bringing to the table? You think about, what are their matchups going to look like? And that's where you can really avoid that one kind of pitfall of thinking about both teams the exact same way, right? Because both teams probably need to think differently about how they're going to win the game. That brings us to building our framework, which is part 3 of this. I'm going to really focus this a little bit towards bank shot, just because that's kind of what I'm playing right now, right? But I do think that this works for just about any kind of tabletop game, regardless of how there you've decided, because every tabletop game manages fatigue a little differently. But I think that you can pretty much kind of use this as a way to think about, like, how do you want to manage? And you can come up with this. I think this framework will be useful for just about any basketball game that you want to play when you're talking full play. So as I'm building the framework, I want to keep this simple and fast. I don't want you to have to spend like an hour trying to think about like how to approach this. You really shouldn't need spreadsheets at the table with like your entire rotation. All right. This is really just kind of starting to think about like the team in front of you. So first, start to label your team a little bit, right? Maybe use some like color coders or something like that, and just start to think about like what you're going to do. All right. First, look at the points per game. Identify who your tier 1 scorers are. It's usually your first and second top scorers. And then think about your tier 2 scorers, right? Those next two guys. Then look at your assist ratings. Who are the guys who help initiate the offense? You're going to tell that by looking at assist ratings. And then think about who that secondary initiator are. In most lineups, they're going to be your point guards, right? But there are a couple of teams that utilize other guys. So you're going to want to check out, like, who are the guys who are helping to kind of drive the offense. And the assist is a good way to understand, like, who it is that's helping to drive the offense. And then the third thing you're going to want to do is look at those rebound ratings. Who are those guys who are your anchors for rebounding? Because they are the ones who help kind of stabilize your possessions. They're going to get the ball back when you're on defense. They're going to keep the ball when you're on offense. And once you have identified those three groups, scorers, playmakers, rebounders, now you can start to bring in the minutes per game. If you're like me, you probably have often started with minutes per game and tried to figure out who are the 5 guys that you should put on out there first. And then you make sure that you've got all your 5-year positions like kind of covered, right? 2 guards, 2 forwards, a center. Switch that around a little bit. You still want to think about those positions and everything, but this framework of having a couple scorers, right? Having a guy who can drive the offense, having a couple of rebounders, like that's going to be a better way for you to think about that. And then start to put those players into your bands. Do you have anybody that you want to be your heavy minute stars? There's that one guy on every roster, like we said, who's that star, who's probably going to be the guy that you want to have out there more often than not. Behind him, you should have your normal starters, the guys who are probably looking at like that 30 to 36 or 38 minutes per game, right? They're your heavy minute stars. They're the guys, they're the starters, right? They're the guys who should be there and playing some of these key roles that we just mentioned. Then behind that, you're going to get into those core rotations. And I think this is a good time for you to think about, like, what am I really planning on doing? Am I going with an 8-man rotation? Is this going to be more of a 9-man rotation? Or do I plan on using like a full kind of deep bench of 10 guys? I do tend to see, and this is where it starts to flatten out my rosters a little bit, right? And flatten out my games a little bit, is I tend to lean towards having those 10 where I'm like, I know who the starter is at each of the 5 positions and I know who the backup is. Well, if you go to that 8-man rotation, what you're doing is saying, I know who my 2 guards are and I have a third guard behind them. I know who my 2 forwards are and I know who the forward is behind them. And I rotate those 3 guys into those 2 positions. And I probably have 2 centers that I can move in there. Or maybe you have a team that flexes a little bit and sometimes there's a 3-guard lineup or a 3-forward lineup that you're getting out there. So think about what that looks like for your particular team as you start to set up those rotations. And then set up this is step 2 now, right? We looked at step 1 is just understanding the guys on the team. Step 2 is create 2 simple rules. Every lineup that you build for your rotations has to have one of your initiators. Rule number 2 is every lineup has to have a tier 1 or a tier 2 scorer, unless foul trouble forces you to just survive a stretch for a little while. All right? So now you've got the initiator, you've got your scorers. If you have a couple of other spots, because it's a 5-man lineup, that's where you're going to look for maybe a defensive specialist, or you're going to look for rebounders, right? You're going to try to think about like setting up those matchups the right way. Step 3 now is building your stagger plan. You can't play the same 5 guys throughout the game. You're going to have to rest people throughout the game. You're going to rest people in the first half. You're going to rest people in the second half. You may even rest people each quarter, right? You're going to think about what your rotations are. In bank shot, you've got 6-minute segments, right? So you have kind of the first half of each quarter and the second half of each quarter, and that allows you to set up. You can substitute in between too, but you definitely want to start thinking about what does my stagger plan look like here. If I've got 2 tier 1 scorers, I don't want to sit them at the same time. I've got to stagger their rest windows. So maybe early on, I'm going to take my top scorer and he's going to get an early break. Maybe I'll give him like a few minutes at the end of the first quarter. And then at the start of the second quarter, my second scorer is going to take a break. I'm still going to have them together most of the time, right? But I am going to start to stagger their rests a little bit. And then maybe when I come out of the break at halftime, maybe my second scorer starts on the bench. And right before we get to the fourth quarter, maybe I give my number one scorer a little bit of a break because, I want him to be there in crunch time. And that allows you to start thinking about like how your bench units are going to be utilized on the floor. Part of it is to support the top scorer, right? You want your star to always have good players around them. They should have somebody who's a secondary ball handler. How are you going to create more opportunities for that scorer? Well, you're going to want some good rebounding. So you're going to have a good rebounding anchor, especially if your lineup starts to get thin, right? Like I have to keep that good rebounder out on the floor with my top scorer. So you'll build in that stagger plan. You're going to think more now about what your rotations look like. And now you get to step 4. What's that kind of coaching identity that I want to utilize for this team as I sit down for solo play? And this will really help you kind of avoid symmetry coaching, right? Coaching both teams the same way. So before tip-off, give each team kind of a personality, right? Maybe create a card that you can put there that says, this team's coach does this. For instance, Team A might be, it's going to be creator-led. Going to use short rotations, and we're going to be really aggressive in our time management with the stars. Team B, on the other hand, might say, you know what? We can beat them on the glass. We're going to be rebound-led. I want to go deep on my rotations. And when it comes to dealing with fouls, we're going to be a little bit more conservative. Meaning, maybe as soon as a guy gets 2 fouls, I take him off the floor. I want to make sure he's around at the end of the game. Maybe as soon as he has 3 fouls in the first half, he sits for the rest of the half. Like that would be my conservative approach to fouls. All right. Come up with a couple of those things that you can kind of put down on like a little coaching card to remind you, like, right, as I make my decisions, this is what this coach is supposed to be thinking about. Then, and this is really important, you really have to follow those identities unless you get a trigger moment. And this is really important because when you manage both teams, the biggest killer to your realism is when you start coaching both of these teams exactly the same way. So now, step 5, use your triggers to switch the plans. The old Mike Tyson, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. You don't need that many triggers, right? But here's a few simple ones that you can use. If you go down by more than 10 in the second half, you might want to shorten your rotation and start to spike your star minutes, right? You want to get him out on the floor a little bit more. Or maybe the opposite if you're up by more than 10. Another trigger. If your tier 1 scorer is in foul trouble, promote a tier 3 guy to temporarily tier 2 usage or shift your offense toward your initiator. Sometimes the games are dictating that a little bit, but you can also do it by managing the roster. If you're up big late, that's when you can start to have a dip happen, right? Now I can start to pull some minutes back and I could say, if all of a sudden I find my team is up by 20, maybe my star isn't playing in the fourth quarter. Maybe I can have this be one of those games where I pull back a little bit on his minutes. But here's the final trigger, and it's probably the one that matters the most. Late in the game, 1 possession situation, your best player has to be out on the floor, period, unless he's fouled out. That's what we miss when we play to those average minutes. Because that real coach, he's not trying to hit 40.4 for Michael Jordan. He's trying to win tonight. All right, let's come back and wrap up today's episode. So if there's one big takeaway from today, it's this. The average minutes, they're a season statistic. You need to coach your game based on your game statistics. The goal isn't to hit a perfect number every night. The goal is to produce believable basketball, and that means variance. So instead of managing playing time like the spreadsheet, you just try this approach. Use your minute ranges, not exact targets. Let your foul trouble do some of the work for you. But most importantly, be really intentional about how do I plan on winning this game. Once you've answered that question, the minutes stop being a math problem. They start becoming what they are in real basketball. It's a strategic tool. If you're managing both teams in solo play and not playing head-to-head against somebody, just remember that you don't have to coach both teams into the same middle ground. Give each side a plan, give each side a personality, and just let the game unfold. Because now that's going to make your tabletop basketball game start to feel like you're in the arena. Some guys are going to play 47 minutes. Some guys are going to play 34 minutes. The story of the game helps you decide how that's going to play out. All right, if you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you subscribe to the podcast, maybe leave a rating, share it with somebody who also loves coaching tabletop sports just as much as you do. Next week, it's episode 244, and I'm going to go back to give you a recap of my 2024 Mets project. We're going to break down a little bit more some of the statistics that took place and just go a little deeper into what kind of played out and maybe even do a little bit of a retrospective on that project too. That'll be next week. But until then, thanks for listening.